The rain hammered against the cracked bus stop shelter where 23-year-old Emma Rodriguez sat, her worn jacket pulled tight over her 7-month pregnant belly. The October wind cut through the gaps in the plastic walls, and she pressed her back against the advertisement panel, trying to find any warmth. In her hands, she clutched a crumpled envelope that had arrived at the homeless shelter 3 days ago, an envelope that promised something she never thought possible, an inheritance, a cabin, a place to call her own. If you're enjoying this story and want to see more content like this, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us continue bringing you these meaningful stories. Emma had been living on the streets of Portland, Oregon for 8 months now. The city's bridges and doorways had become familiar landmarks in her daily struggle for survival. She knew which soup kitchens served on which days, which libraries let you stay warm the longest, which park benches the police didn't bother checking after midnight. But none of that would help her once the baby came. The social worker at the shelter had been direct with her. Without stable housing, without a support system, they would take her baby. The state would intervene. That conversation had kept her awake for 72 straight hours, her mind racing with panic and desperation. The envelope had arrived addressed to Emma Christine Rodriguez, care of the Morrison Street shelter. Inside was a letter from a law firm in Bend, a town she had never visited, about a woman she barely remembered, Margaret Hartley, her mother's aunt. A woman Emma had met exactly once, at her mother's funeral when Emma was 11 years old. She remembered a tall woman with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, wire-rimmed glasses, and kind eyes that seemed to see right through her. Margaret had squeezed her shoulder that day and said something Emma had never forgotten. "You're stronger than you know, child. Remember that?" According to the letter, Margaret Hartley had passed away at 87, and in her will, she had left her cabin and 5 acres of land to Emma Rodriguez, her great-niece, the only family she had left. The lawyer, a Mr. Thomas Chen, requested that Emma contact his office to arrange the transfer of the property. There was a phone number, an address, and a small hand-drawn map showing the location of the cabin in the Cascade Mountain foothills, about 30 miles outside of Bend. Emma had stared at that letter for 2 hours straight, convinced it was some kind of mistake or cruel joke. But she had called the number from the shelter's phone, and Mr. Chen had confirmed everything. The cabin was real. The inheritance was real. It was hers, with no strings attached. All she had to do was get to Bend and sign the paperwork. The bus ride from Portland to Bend took 4 hours and cost her almost all the money she had saved from panhandling and odd jobs, $43. She bought the cheapest ticket and used the remaining $7 for a sandwich and a bottle of water. As the bus pulled away from the Portland terminal and headed east toward the mountains, Emma pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the city fade into rural Oregon landscape. The scenery transformed gradually. The urban sprawl gave way to farmland, then to thick forests of Douglas fir and ponderosa pine. The elevation climbed, and soon snow-capped peaks appeared in the distance. Emma had grown up in Southern California, in the dry heat of Riverside County, and she had never seen mountains like these. They were massive and ancient, their presence both intimidating and somehow comforting. Bend appeared suddenly as the bus crested a hill. The town sat in a high desert valley, surrounded by mountains on all sides. The Deschutes River cut through the center of town, and even from the highway, Emma could see the old brick buildings of the downtown area. It looked like something from a postcard. Clean, organized, safe. Nothing like the streets she had been surviving on for the past 8 months. The bus station was small, just a covered platform with a few benches and a tiny office. Emma climbed down carefully, her back aching from the long ride. The air here was different, thinner, crisper. It smelled like pine trees and snow, even though it was only October. She stood on the platform for a moment, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder, the envelope clutched in her hand, and wondered what the hell she was supposed to do next. The law office was downtown, according to the map. Emma started walking, following the main road toward the cluster of buildings she could see in the distance. Her feet hurt. She had been wearing the same pair of donated sneakers for 3 months, and they were falling apart. But she kept moving, one step at a time, because that's what she had learned to do. You keep moving. You don't stop. Stopping means giving up, and she couldn't afford that. Not now, not with the baby depending on her. Downtown Bend was quieter than she expected. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and the streets were populated but not crowded. People walked dogs, pushed strollers, carried coffee cups from local cafes. Everyone looked healthy and purposeful, like they belonged there. Emma felt their eyes on her as she passed. She knew what they saw. A young woman with tangled brown hair, wearing clothes that didn't quite fit, moving with the cautious shuffle of someone used to being told to move along. She kept her head down and focused on finding the address. Chen and Associates was located on the second floor of a renovated brick building near the river. Emma climbed the stairs slowly, her hand on the railing, her heart pounding. The office was small but professional. Wood floors, plants in the windows, framed degrees on the walls. A receptionist looked up as Emma entered, and for just a second, Emma saw the flicker of judgment cross the woman's face before it was replaced by professional courtesy. "I have an appointment with Mr. Chen," Emma said quietly. "Emma Rodriguez." The receptionist checked her computer and nodded. "Yes, he's expecting you. Please have a seat." Emma sat in one of the waiting room chairs, her duffel bag on her lap like a shield. She didn't have to wait long. A door opened and a man in his 50s emerged, Asian American with graying hair and glasses. He smiled warmly when he saw her. "Miss Rodriguez, thank you for coming. I'm Thomas Chen. Please, come into my office." His office was lined with bookshelves and had a large window overlooking the river. He gestured for Emma to sit in a comfortable chair across from his desk, and he sat down with a thick folder in front of him. "First, let me express my condolences on the loss of your great-aunt Margaret. She was a remarkable woman, and it was an honor to handle her affairs." Emma nodded, unsure what to say. She had barely known Margaret. Mr. Chen opened the folder and pulled out several documents. "I'll make this as straightforward as possible. Margaret Hartley owned a cabin and 5 acres of land in the Cascade foothills. The property has been in her family for 60 years. In her will, executed 2 years before her death, she specifically named you as the sole beneficiary of this property. There are no debts, no liens, no complications. The property is yours, free and clear." He slid a photograph across the desk. It showed a small log cabin surrounded by tall pine trees. The cabin looked old but solid, with a steep roof and a covered porch. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. "That's the cabin," Mr. Chen said. "It's rustic, but it's structurally sound. Margaret lived there until about 5 years ago, when her health required her to move into assisted living. Since then, it's been unoccupied, though I've had a local caretaker check on it periodically. The utilities are still connected. There's well water, a septic system, and a propane generator for electricity." Emma stared at the photograph. This cabin was hers. This actual place, with trees and a porch and a chimney, belonged to her. "Why me?" she asked suddenly. "I met her once. I was a kid. Why would she leave this to me?" Mr. Chen smiled gently. "Margaret never had children of her own. She lost her husband in the Vietnam War and never remarried. From what she told me, you were the only family she had left after your mother passed away. She kept track of you over the years, as much as she could. She wanted you to have somewhere safe. That's what she said to me. Make sure Emma has somewhere safe." Emma's eyes filled with tears. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. "All I need from you today is a signature on a few documents," Mr. Chen continued. "Then I'll give you the keys and the deed. The property is yours. If you need help with anything else, finding resources, connecting with local services, please don't hesitate to ask. I want you to succeed here, Miss Rodriguez." An hour later, Emma walked out of the law office with a manila envelope containing the deed to the property, a set of keys, and detailed directions to the cabin. Mr. Chen had also given her $200 in cash from Margaret's estate, money set aside specifically to help Emma get settled. She had thanked him 3 times, her voice breaking, before finally leaving. Now she stood on the sidewalk, clutching the envelope, trying to process what had just happened. She owned property. She had a home. After 8 months of sleeping in shelters and doorways, after nights of fear and cold and uncertainty, she had an actual place to go. But first, she needed supplies. Emma walked to a nearby grocery store and carefully spent $70 on essentials. Canned food, rice, pasta, peanut butter, bread, instant coffee, bottled water. She bought matches, candles, and a cheap flashlight. She bought a bar of soap, shampoo, and a pack of towels. Every purchase was calculated, every dollar stretched as far as it could go. Getting to the cabin was harder. It was 30 miles outside of town, up a Forest Service road. There was no bus service. Emma stood at a gas station on the edge of town, her thumb out, trying to hitch a ride. After 40 minutes, a beat-up pickup truck pulled over. The driver was a man in his 60s with a weathered face and a Deschutes brewery cap. "Where are you headed?" he asked. Emma showed him the map. He studied it for a moment, then nodded. "That's up in the high country. I can get you most of the way there. I'm heading up to check on my hunting cabin." Emma climbed into the truck, her groceries and duffel bag piled on her lap. They drove in silence for a while, the truck climbing steadily into the mountains. The paved road turned to gravel, then to dirt. The forest grew denser, the trees taller. Snow appeared in patches on the ground, even though it was only October. "You got people up here?" the man asked eventually. "Just inherited a cabin," Emma said, "from my great-aunt." "Margaret Hartley's place?" Emma looked at him in surprise. "You knew her?" "Everyone knew Margaret. Tough old bird. Lived up here by herself for decades. Sorry for your loss." He dropped her off at the turnoff to her property, pointing down a narrow dirt road that disappeared into the trees. Emma thanked him and watched his truck drive away, leaving her alone in the silence of the forest. She stood there for a moment, listening. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like the ocean. Birds called in the distance. There were no car sounds, no sirens, no city noise. Just the forest. Emma adjusted her bag and started walking down the dirt road. It was steep and rocky, and she had to move carefully. After about 15 minutes, the cabin appeared through the trees. It looked exactly like the photograph. A small log structure with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The logs were dark with age, and moss grew on the north side of the roof. The windows were dusty but intact. A woodpile sat under a tarp near the porch, and an old axe was buried in a chopping stump. Emma climbed the 3 steps to the porch, her heart pounding. She pulled out the keys Mr. Chen had given her and fitted the largest one into the lock. It turned with a click, and the door swung open. The inside of the cabin was dim and smelled of old wood and dust. Emma stepped inside cautiously, letting her eyes adjust. The main room was larger than she expected. There was a stone fireplace on one wall, a small kitchen area with a propane stove and a sink, and a wooden table with 2 chairs. A doorway led to a bedroom, and another to a tiny bathroom. The furniture was simple but sturdy. Handmade quilts covered the bed. Shelves lined the walls filled with books and canning jars and odds and ends. Emma set down her bags and walked slowly through the cabin, touching everything. The rough wood of the walls, the smooth stones of the fireplace, the worn surface of the table. This was real. This was hers. She found the propane tank outside and managed to get the generator running after several attempts. Lights flickered on inside the cabin, and the ancient refrigerator hummed to life. The water pump kicked on when she turned the faucet, and after a minute of rust-colored water, it ran clear and cold. Emma sat down at the kitchen table and started to cry. Not sad tears, relief, gratitude, exhaustion. All of it came pouring out. She cried until she couldn't anymore, and then she sat in the silence, listening to the wind outside, feeling the baby move inside her, and for the first time in months, she felt something like hope. Over the next few days, Emma worked to make the cabin livable. She cleaned every surface, swept the floors, washed the windows. She discovered that Margaret had left behind not just furniture, but supplies. There were blankets in the closet, dishes in the cupboards, tools in the shed. There was even a stack of firewood, dry and ready to burn. The biggest challenge was food and money. Emma had about $130 left, and she had no job, no car, and no way to easily get to town. She rationed her groceries carefully, eating small meals, making everything last as long as possible. She drank water from the well and boiled it to be safe. She kept the propane generator running only a few hours a day to conserve fuel. At night, she built fires in the fireplace and sat wrapped in quilts, reading the books from Margaret's shelves. There were novels, field guides to plants and wildlife, books on homesteading and self-sufficiency. Emma read them all, absorbing information like a sponge. How to identify edible plants, how to preserve food, how to fix basic plumbing and electrical problems. Margaret had been preparing for a life of self-reliance, and now Emma was learning the same skills. One afternoon, while exploring the property, Emma discovered a root cellar built into the hillside behind the cabin. Inside, she found shelves lined with dozens of canning jars, preserved vegetables, jams, pickles, tomato sauce. All of it still sealed, most of it still good. Emma stood in the cool darkness of the cellar and felt another wave of gratitude for this woman she barely knew, who had somehow known Emma would need this. But as the days passed, reality set in. Emma needed money. She needed medical care for the baby. She needed a way to sustain herself beyond eating canned food and burning firewood. She was isolated up here, 30 miles from town, with no transportation and no support system. One morning, Emma walked down to the main road and hitched a ride back into Bend. She went to the public library and used their computer to research resources for pregnant women. She found a clinic that offered free prenatal care. She found information about WIC, food stamps, and state assistance programs. She filled out applications online, providing the cabin's address as her residence, hoping it would be enough. At the clinic, a nurse practitioner named Sandra examined her. The baby was healthy, measuring right on track for a March due year. Sandra was kind but direct. "You need to be in town when the baby comes," she told Emma. "You're too far out. If something goes wrong, if you go into labor early, you won't have time to get help. Do you have anyone you can stay with?" Emma shook her head. No one. Sandra gave her information about transitional housing programs and a list of local shelters. But Emma had already been through the shelter system. She knew what it was like. The noise, the lack of privacy, the constant threat of theft or violence. She couldn't go back to that, not when she had the cabin. On her way back to the main road to hitch a ride, Emma passed a small cafe called the Mountain Bean. A handwritten sign in the window caught her eye. "Help wanted. Inquire within." Emma stood outside for a long moment, debating. She was 7 months pregnant. Who would hire her? But she needed money desperately, and she had nothing to lose. Inside, the cafe was warm and smelled like fresh coffee and baked goods. A woman in her 50s stood behind the counter, wiping down the espresso machine. She had short gray hair and wore a flannel shirt over a band t-shirt. "Hi," Emma said quietly. "I saw the sign. Are you still hiring?" The woman looked her up and down, taking in Emma's worn clothes and obvious pregnancy. "What's your name?" "Emma Rodriguez." "I'm Carol. I own this place. You have any experience?" "I worked at a diner in California. 2 years. I can make coffee, take orders, clean. I'm a hard worker." Carol studied her for a moment. "When's the baby due?" "March." "You got housing, transportation?" Emma hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I just inherited a cabin up in the mountains. I'm trying to get on my feet. I need work. I'll do anything." Carol poured 2 cups of coffee and gestured for Emma to sit at one of the small tables. She sat down across from her. "I'm going to be straight with you. You're pregnant, you're obviously struggling, and I don't know you. Those are 3 good reasons not to hire you." Emma's heart sank. "But," Carol continued, holding up a hand, "I've been where you are. Different circumstances, but I know what it's like to have nothing and need a break. So here's what I'll do. I'll give you a trial. 2 weeks. You show up on time, you work hard, you're honest with me, and the job is yours. $8 an hour plus tips, 4 shifts a week, 6 hours each. That's about $200 a week if you're reliable." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. "Thank you. You won't regret this." "I better not. Can you start tomorrow?" "Yes, absolutely." Carol wrote down the schedule and gave Emma a stern look. "You need a ride up to that cabin tonight?" "I was going to hitch." Carol shook her head. "Not safe. I'll drive you. I close at 6. That evening, Carol drove Emma up to the cabin in her old Subaru. She looked around at the property with an appraising eye. "Margaret's place. I remember her. Sold her coffee every week for years. She was a good woman." "She left me everything," Emma said quietly. "I don't know why, but I'm grateful." "Margaret saw something in you," Carol said. "Don't waste it." Emma worked hard at the Mountain Bean. She arrived early, stayed late, and never complained. She learned the espresso machine, memorized the menu, and treated every customer with genuine warmth. The tips were good, better than she expected, and by the end of her first month, she had saved almost $900. With that money, she bought a used bicycle from a second-hand shop. It was a mountain bike, sturdy enough to handle the rough roads up to the cabin. Now she could get to town on her own, no longer dependent on hitchhiking. The ride was hard, especially as her pregnancy progressed, but it was worth it for the independence. She also bought a used baby crib and changing table from a thrift store. Carol let her store them in the cafe's back room until she could figure out how to get them up to the cabin. When Emma mentioned needing transportation for the furniture, one of the regular customers, a contractor named Mike, offered to deliver them in his truck. "You're doing good, kid," Mike said as they unloaded the crib onto the cabin's porch. "Keep it up." Word spread in the small community about Emma's situation. People started leaving extra tips at the cafe. Someone donated a car seat. Someone else brought bags of baby clothes and supplies. The local food bank delivered boxes of groceries. Even Sandra from the clinic checked in regularly, offering advice and encouragement. But Emma also faced challenges. The weather turned colder. By November, snow fell regularly, covering the ground around the cabin. The dirt road became treacherous, and there were days Emma couldn't make it to work. Carol was understanding, but Emma hated missing shifts and losing income. The isolation was harder than Emma expected. Some days, she didn't see or speak to another person. The silence of the forest, which had seemed peaceful at first, began to feel oppressive. She was alone with her thoughts, her fears, her memories. At night, lying in bed with the baby kicking inside her, she wondered if she was crazy to try to do this alone. One particularly hard day in December, Emma broke down at work. She had ridden her bike through slush and snow, arrived freezing and exhausted, and then spilled an entire tray of drinks. She stood in the mess, shaking, unable to stop the tears. Carol sent her to the back room and brought her hot tea. "Talk to me," she said gently. Emma told her everything. The fear of childbirth alone, the worry about money, the uncertainty about whether she could actually raise a baby in a remote cabin with no experience and no help. She told Carol about losing her mother to cancer when she was 14, about bouncing through foster care, about aging out of the system and ending up on the streets. She told her about the father of her baby, a guy she had met at a shelter who disappeared when she told him she was pregnant. Carol listened without interrupting. When Emma finished, Carol took her hand. "You're not alone," she said firmly. "You have people here now. Me, Mike, Sandra, the customers who ask about you every day. We're not going to let you fail. Do you understand me?" Emma nodded, unable to speak. "You need to line up a birth plan," Carol continued. "You can't be up at that cabin when you go into labor. When you're 8 months along, you're moving into town. I have a spare bedroom. You'll stay with me until the baby comes, and for a month after. No arguments." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm telling you. And before you say you don't want charity, remember this. Everyone needs help sometimes, everyone. Accepting help doesn't make you weak, it makes you smart. By January, Emma was 8 months pregnant and enormous. Riding the bike to town was no longer possible. Carol picked her up for work shifts, and true to her word, Emma moved into Carol's spare bedroom in late January. Carol's house was small but comfortable, located on a quiet street near downtown. Emma felt awkward and out of place at first, unused to living with someone, unused to being cared for, but Carol made it easy. She gave Emma space when she needed it and company when she wanted it. They watched movies together, cooked meals, talked about everything and nothing. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, Emma went into labor. It started as a dull ache in her back that grew steadily worse throughout the day. By evening, the contractions were coming every 5 minutes. Carol drove her to the hospital, stayed with her through the entire labor, held her hand when the pain was unbearable, and cried with her when the baby was finally born. Emma named her daughter Margaret Rose Rodriguez, Maggie. She was 7 pounds 4 ounces, with dark hair in her mother's eyes. Emma held her in the hospital bed, overwhelmed by love and terror in equal measure. This tiny person was depending on her completely. Emma had to be enough. The first weeks were brutal. Maggie cried constantly, rarely slept, and Emma stumbled through the days in an exhausted haze. But Carol helped with everything. She showed Emma how to swaddle, how to burp, how to tell the difference between different types of cries. She did laundry, cooked meals, and took night shifts so Emma could sleep. When Maggie was 6 weeks old, Emma returned to work part-time, bringing the baby with her. Carol set up a playpen in the back office, and between customers, Emma nursed and changed diapers and soothed her daughter. The regular customers adored Maggie, bringing gifts and offering advice. The Mountain Bean became a strange kind of family. By late March, when the snow finally melted and the mountain roads were passable again, Emma made a decision. She moved back to the cabin with Maggie. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. She was truly on her own now, responsible for keeping this tiny human alive in a remote cabin with no running phone line and limited electricity. But it was also freedom. This was her home, her land, her life that she was building from nothing. The first few months were an intense learning curve. Emma learned to function on no sleep. She learned to change diapers with one hand while holding a flashlight in her mouth. She learned to nurse while cooking, while cleaning, while doing laundry in a bucket. She learned efficiency born of necessity. As spring turned to summer, life at the cabin found a rhythm. Emma worked 3 shifts a week at the cafe, with Carol watching Maggie. The other days, she focused on making the cabin more livable and sustainable. She repaired the chicken coop behind the cabin and bought 6 laying hens. She planted a vegetable garden using seeds and advice from a book in Margaret's collection. She learned to can and preserve food. Money was still tight, but Emma was making it work. Between her wages, tips, and government assistance, she covered her basic needs. She bought a cheap laptop with internet capabilities and started taking online courses in accounting and small business management, studying during Maggie's naps. She had a long-term plan forming. Eventually, she wanted to be self-employed, maybe doing bookkeeping for local businesses, working from the cabin. One afternoon in August, Emma was working in the garden with Maggie and a baby carrier on her back when she heard a vehicle coming up the road. She straightened, wiping dirt from her hands, and watched a silver sedan pull up to the cabin. Mr. Chen, the lawyer, climbed out of the car. Emma blinked in surprise. "Mr. Chen, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he said, smiling. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. I was in the area and wanted to see how you were doing." Emma invited him inside and made coffee. Mr. Chen looked around the cabin with obvious approval. "You've done wonderful work here. Margaret would be proud." "I hope so. I think about her a lot. I wish I had known her better." Mr. Chen reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "There's something I need to give you. Margaret left instructions that I was to deliver this to you personally, but only after you had been living here for 6 months." Emma took the envelope, confused. Inside was a handwritten letter and another smaller envelope. The letter was from Margaret, written in neat, careful handwriting. "Dear Emma, if you're reading this, it means you've made it. You've survived the hardest part. You've proven what I always knew. You're stronger than you know. I've been where you are. Not exactly, but close enough. I was young once, scared and alone, with no clear path forward. My husband died in a war that made no sense. I was pregnant when I got the news. I lost that baby 3 months later. The grief nearly destroyed me. I came to this cabin to hide from the world. But the cabin saved me. The forest saved me. The work of surviving, of building a life with my own 2 hands, gave me purpose. I want that for you, too. I've left you one more thing. In the cellar, behind the 3rd shelf on the left, there's a loose stone. Behind it is a metal box. Inside the box is money, $20,000. I saved it over the years, little by little. It's yours now. Use it wisely. Invest in your future. Give your child opportunities. But most importantly, remember that wealth isn't just money, it's having a home. It's having purpose. It's knowing you're capable of surviving anything. I never got to see you grow up, Emma, but I kept track of you as much as I could. I knew when you lost your mother. I knew about foster care. I knew when you ended up on the streets. I wanted to help, but I was old and sick by then, and I didn't think you'd accept help from a stranger. So I did the only thing I could. I left you this place, this cabin that saved me. I hope it saves you too. You're stronger than you know, child. Remember that. With love, Margaret. Emma read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she and Mr. Chen went to the cellar. Behind the loose stone, exactly where Margaret said it would be, was a metal box. Inside were neat stacks of $100 bills. Emma sat on the cellar floor, holding Maggie, staring at the money. It was more than she had ever seen in her life. What will you do with it? Mr. Chen asked gently. Emma thought for a long moment. Save most of it, for Maggie's future, for emergencies. But some of it I'll use to fix up this cabin, make it winterproof. Maybe buy a reliable truck so I can get to town safely. That sounds very wise. That evening, after Mr. Chen left, Emma sat on the porch with Maggie in her lap, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and pink. She thought about everything that had happened over the past year, the desperation of homelessness, the terror of pregnancy alone, the miracle of Margaret's gift, the kindness of people like Carol and Mr. Chen, the tiny, perfect weight of her daughter in her arms. She thought about Margaret's words, "You're stronger than you know." Emma had never felt strong. For most of her life, she had felt like she was barely surviving, one bad day away from complete collapse. But looking back now, she could see it differently. She had survived things that would have broken many people. She had lost everything and built a life from nothing. She had brought a child into the world against all odds. She had learned to live in this cabin, to grow food, to fix things, to be self-reliant. Maybe that was strength. Not the absence of fear or struggle, but the refusal to give up despite them. Over the following months, Emma used Margaret's money carefully. She sat down with a notebook and created a detailed budget, something she had learned from one of Margaret's books about financial planning. Every dollar had a purpose. $5,000 would go into a high-yield savings account for emergencies only, $3,000 for cabin improvements, $2,000 for a vehicle, $1,000 for solar panels and sustainable infrastructure. The rest would be invested conservatively for Maggie's future education. She hired Mike to help winterize the cabin. They spent 3 long weekends working together, and Emma insisted on learning every step of the process. Mike showed her how to install insulation properly, how to identify and seal air leaks, how to reinforce the roof structure. He taught her basic carpentry and plumbing, skills that would save her money in the future. "The cabin has good bones," Mike said one afternoon as they worked on replacing rotten boards on the porch. "Margaret built this place to last. You're just maintaining what she started." "Did you know her well?" Emma asked. "Known her for 30 years. She was tough, independent, never asked for help, but always offered it to others. She used to bring me vegetables from her garden every summer. When my wife got sick, Margaret showed up with meals every week for 6 months. Never made a big deal about it. Just did what needed to be done." Emma absorbed this information, building a picture of the woman who had saved her. Margaret sounded like someone who understood that true strength included knowing how to support others. The truck Emma bought was a 1998 Ford Ranger with high mileage but a solid engine. She paid $1,800 cash and spent another $300 on repairs. It wasn't pretty, but it was reliable, and more importantly, it gave her independence. No more relying on Carol for rides or hitchhiking down dangerous roads. The solar panel installation was more complicated. Emma researched extensively online, watched dozens of YouTube tutorials, and finally felt confident enough to attempt it herself with Mike's supervision. They mounted 6 panels on the cabin's south-facing roof and connected them to a battery bank in the shed. It wasn't enough to power everything, but it meant Emma could run lights, charge her laptop, and keep the refrigerator going without constantly refilling the propane generator. "Every skill I learn makes me stronger," Emma wrote in a journal she had started keeping. "Every problem I solve myself is proof that I can do this." The journal had become important to her. She wrote in it most nights after Maggie fell asleep, documenting their daily life, her thoughts and fears, the small victories and setbacks. She wanted Maggie to have a record someday of where they had come from and how they had built this life. She also started a small business, just as she had planned. Emma Rodriguez Bookkeeping Services. Her first client was Carol, who needed help organizing the cafe's chaotic financial records. Emma dove into the work with determination, staying up late after Maggie's bedtime to learn accounting software and review tax regulations. The second client came through Mike's recommendation, a small construction company that needed quarterly reports and tax preparation. The owner, a woman named Jennifer, was impressed with Emma's attention to detail and referred her to another business owner. By Christmas, Emma had 5 clients and a waiting list. The work was perfect. She could do it from home on her own schedule while caring for Maggie. She set up a small office area in the cabin's bedroom, with a desk facing the window so she could watch the forest while she worked. Maggie played on a blanket nearby, and Emma learned to type one-handed while holding a bottle or bouncing a fussy baby. But the work also challenged her in ways she hadn't expected. Emma had never graduated high school, having dropped out of foster care at 16. She had her GED, but significant gaps in her education made the accounting work difficult at first. She struggled with complex calculations, with understanding tax codes and financial regulations. There were nights when she wanted to quit, convinced she wasn't smart enough to do this. During one particularly frustrating evening in November, Emma sat at her desk with tears running down her face, staring at a spreadsheet that refused to balance. Maggie was teething and had been crying for hours. The cabin was cold because Emma was trying to conserve propane. Her head pounded with exhaustion. She felt like a fraud, like eventually her clients would realize she had no idea what she was doing. Her phone rang. It was Carol, checking in as she did most evenings. "I can hear it in your voice," Carol said. "What's wrong?" Emma broke down and told her everything. The self-doubt, the fear of failure, the feeling that she was pretending to be something she wasn't. Carol listened patiently, then spoke firmly. "You know what the difference is between you and most people? Most people quit when things get hard. You don't. You've survived things that would destroy others. Learning accounting is nothing compared to what you've already overcome. So you're struggling with a spreadsheet? So what? You'll figure it out. You always do. But what if I can't? What if I'm not smart enough?" Stop that right now. Intelligence isn't about what you already know. It's about your willingness to learn. And you're one of the most determined learners I've ever met. Now, walk me through the problem. Let's solve it together. They spent an hour on the phone, Carol asking questions that helped Emma see where she had made errors in her calculations. When the spreadsheet finally balanced, Emma felt a rush of accomplishment that made all the frustration worthwhile. "See," Carol said, "you did that. Not me. I just asked questions. The solution was in you all along." That conversation became a turning point. Emma stopped seeing her lack of formal education as a weakness and started viewing it as motivation. She enrolled in online courses through the local community college, taking advantage of financial aid, business math, accounting principles, tax preparation. She studied during Maggie's naps and after bedtime, often working until midnight or later. The winter of Maggie's first year was brutally cold. Snow fell heavily throughout January and February, sometimes trapping Emma and Maggie at the cabin for days at a time. Emma learned to read the weather, to stock up on supplies before storms hit, to keep the woodpile full and the generator maintained. She also learned to appreciate the beauty of winter isolation. The forest under snow was magical, silent, and pristine. On clear days, Emma would bundle Maggie into a snowsuit and carry her outside, showing her the icicles hanging from the roof, the animal tracks in the snow, the way sunlight made the ice crystals sparkle like diamonds. Maggie was growing fast, changing almost daily. By 10 months, she was crawling everywhere, exploring every corner of the cabin. By 11 months, she was pulling herself up on furniture, determined to walk. Emma documented everything in photos and videos on her phone, creating a record of these precious early months. But motherhood was also harder than Emma had imagined. The constant vigilance required to keep a baby safe, the exhaustion of interrupted sleep, the worry that every cough or fever might be something serious, the isolation of having no family, no partner, no one to share the burden with. There were moments of deep loneliness. Emma would stand at the window late at night, holding Maggie, watching the darkness of the forest and feeling the weight of her solitude. She was 24 years old, living alone in the mountains with an infant, working multiple jobs, trying to build a life from nothing. Sometimes it felt impossible. One particularly low moment came in early February, during a week when Maggie had an ear infection and Emma was fighting the flu. Both of them were miserable. Emma had no energy, but the baby needed constant care. The clinic was unreachable due to a snowstorm. Emma sat on the bathroom floor at 3 a.m, Maggie screaming in her arms, and sobbed. "I can't do this," she whispered. "It's too hard. I'm not enough." But even as she said it, she was rocking Maggie, checking her temperature, preparing another bottle. Even at her lowest moment, she was doing what needed to be done. That was the thing about being a mother, Emma realized. You didn't get to quit. You didn't get to say it was too hard. You just kept going, one moment at a time, because this tiny person depended on you completely. The storm passed. Maggie's infection cleared up with antibiotics. Emma recovered from the flu. Life continued, as it always did. Carol called every day during difficult periods, offering encouragement and practical advice. When she learned Emma had been sick, she showed up at the cabin as soon as the roads were passable, bringing groceries, medicine, and homemade soup. She stayed for several hours, holding Maggie while Emma slept, cleaning the cabin, restocking the woodpile. "This is what family does," Carol said simply when Emma tried to thank her. "We show up." Emma was learning that family wasn't just blood relations. It was the people who chose to be there, who showed up when things were hard, who celebrated your victories and supported you through defeats. Carol, Mike, Sandra, even some of her clients had become family in ways that mattered more than genetics. Spring arrived slowly that year, with false starts and setbacks. But by late March, the snow was melting, revealing the brown earth underneath. Emma could hear water running everywhere, snowmelt feeding the creeks and streams. The days grew longer. Birds returned to the forest, filling the morning air with song. Emma spent April preparing her expanded garden. She had ordered seeds over the winter, planning carefully based on her research about what grew well at this elevation and climate. Tomatoes, squash, beans, lettuce, carrots, potatoes, herbs. She also ordered fruit tree saplings, apple, pear, cherry. They wouldn't produce for several years, but Emma was thinking long-term now. She was building something that would last. Mike helped her till the garden area with his rototiller, breaking up the compacted soil. Emma added compost she had been building all winter from kitchen scraps and chicken manure. She worked the soil with her hands, feeling its texture, learning to read its needs. "You've got good instincts for this," Mike observed. "Margaret would be pleased." "I never gardened before coming here," Emma admitted. "I'm learning as I go." "That's the best way. Books can teach you theory, but dirt teaches you truth." Emma planted her seeds according to the charts she had made, marking each row with labeled stakes. She watered carefully, checked for pests daily, pulled weeds as soon as they appeared. Gardening became a meditation, a way to quiet her anxious mind and focus on the simple, productive work of growing food. The chickens were thriving, providing fresh eggs every day. Emma had learned their individual personalities. Henrietta, the bossy Rhode Island red who ruled the coop. Pearl, the gentle white leghorn who let Maggie pet her. Pepper, the black Australorp who laid the largest eggs. The chickens had become part of the family, and Emma found herself talking to them as she did her morning chores, telling them her plans for the day. Maggie's first birthday in February had been a milestone, but her first steps in April felt even more significant. Emma was washing dishes when she heard Maggie giggling behind her. She turned to see her daughter standing unsupported in the middle of the cabin, looking immensely proud of herself. Then Maggie took one wobbling step, then another, and fell forward into Emma's arms. Emma cried happy tears, holding her daughter close. "You did it, baby girl. You walked." That night Emma called Carol to share the news, and Carol cried too. "They're not babies forever," Carol said with a mixture of joy and sadness. "She's growing up. You're doing an amazing job, Emma." "I'm trying," Emma said. "Some days I feel like I'm making it up as I go." "That's called parenting. Everyone makes it up as they go. The difference is you're doing it alone and doing it well." But Emma was learning she wasn't entirely alone. The community that had formed around her and Maggie was genuine and supportive. And when Emma mentioned needing childcare so she could take on more bookkeeping clients, Sandra connected her with a retired teacher named Dorothy who lived in Bend and loved watching babies. Dorothy's rate was reasonable, and she was so gentle and experienced with Maggie that Emma felt comfortable leaving her daughter for a few hours several times a week. Those hours of uninterrupted work time allowed Emma to expand her business. By May, she had 8 regular clients and was earning enough to cover all her expenses with money left over for savings. She opened a college fund for Maggie and contributed to it monthly, imagining a future where her daughter would have opportunities Emma never had. The business growth also gave Emma confidence she hadn't felt before. She was good at this work. She had a talent for seeing patterns in numbers, for organizing chaos into clear, understandable reports. Clients complimented her regularly, recommended her to others, and trusted her with their financial information. It felt amazing to be valued for her skills rather than pitied for her circumstances. One afternoon in late May, Emma was working on her laptop on the cabin porch while Maggie napped inside. The door was open so she could hear if the baby woke up. The spring air was warm and fragrant with pine and wildflowers. Birds sang in the trees. The garden was showing green shoots in neat rows. The chickens scratched contentedly in their enclosure. Emma paused her work and just looked around, taking it all in. 1 year ago, she had been living in Carol's spare bedroom, terrified about giving birth, uncertain about everything. 2 years ago, she had been sleeping under bridges in Portland, pregnant and desperate. Now she owned this land, this cabin. She had a thriving business. She had a healthy, happy daughter. She had friends, community, purpose. The transformation was almost impossible to believe. Yet here she was, living proof that lives could change, that rock bottom wasn't the end of the story. Her phone rang. It was Jennifer, the construction company owner who had been her second bookkeeping client. "Emma, I have a proposal for you," Jennifer said. "I'm expanding my business, and I need someone to manage all the financial operations. Full-time position, salary, benefits, the works. I want it to be you." Emma's heart raced. A real job offer, steady income, benefits which meant health insurance for her and Maggie, but it would mean giving up her independence, going back to working for someone else, probably needing to be in an office. "Can I work remotely?" Emma asked. "I need to be home with my daughter." "That's the thing," Jennifer said. "I don't need you in an office. I need someone I trust who's detail-oriented and reliable. Where you work doesn't matter. I'm offering $35,000 a year to start, full benefits, and you can set your own hours as long as the work gets done. What do you think?" Emma's mind reeled. $35,000. That was more money than she had ever imagined earning. That was stability. That was security. That was the ability to not just survive, but to actually plan for the future. "Can I think about it?" Emma asked. "Take a week. But Emma, you should know, I'm offering this because you're the best at what you do. Not because I feel sorry for you. You earned this." After the call, Emma sat on the porch steps, processing the offer. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, but another part worried about losing the other clients she had built relationships with, about putting all her eggs in one basket, about what would happen if the job didn't work out. That evening, she called Carol and explained the situation. "What's holding you back?" Carol asked. "Fear, I guess. Fear of depending on someone else again. I've built something independent here. What if I take the job and then lose it?" "Emma, life is risk. You can't protect yourself from every possible bad outcome. Sometimes you have to trust that good things can actually happen to you. You deserve this opportunity. Take it. If it doesn't work out, you'll figure something else out. You always do." Emma took the job. She negotiated a contract that allowed her to keep 2 of her smaller bookkeeping clients on the side, maintaining some diversification. Jennifer agreed readily, impressed that Emma was thinking strategically about her career. The new position started in June, and Emma threw herself into it with characteristic determination. She set up a proper home office in the cabin, bought a better computer and printer, established business hours, and created systems for managing Jennifer's complex financial operations. The work was challenging but satisfying, and the steady paycheck felt like a miracle every time it hit her bank account. Summer at the cabin was gorgeous. The garden flourished, producing more vegetables than Emma and Maggie could eat. Emma learned to can and preserve, filling Margaret's old canning jars with tomato sauce, pickled cucumbers, green beans, and jams made from wild berries she and Maggie picked in the forest. The shelves in the root cellar began filling up, a hedge against winter, a source of pride. Maggie was walking confidently now, exploring everything with toddler enthusiasm. Emma baby-proofed the cabin as much as possible, but she also believed in letting Maggie learn through experience. If she touched something hot, she learned hot. If she fell down, she learned to get back up. Emma supervised carefully but didn't hover, wanting her daughter to develop confidence and independence. On warm afternoons, Emma would take Maggie down to a small creek that ran through the property. They would sit in the shade, splashing in the cold water, watching for frogs and fish. Maggie laughed with pure joy, and Emma would think about how this simple moment, this ordinary afternoon by a creek, was actually extraordinary. This was childhood. This was what she had never had, and was determined to give her daughter. Safety, freedom, joy, nature, time. The community connections deepened over the summer. Carol invited Emma and Maggie to a 4th of July barbecue at her house, where Emma met Carol's extended friend group. They were welcoming and curious about Emma's life at the cabin, but never intrusive or pitying. They treated her as an equal, which meant more than they'd probably realized. Mike invited Emma to a community work day, where neighbors helped each other with big projects. Emma spent a Saturday helping repair a barn, and in return, several people came to her cabin the following weekend and helped her build a proper shed for storing firewood and tools. The sense of belonging, of being part of something larger than herself, filled an empty space Emma hadn't fully acknowledged. Dorothy, the child care provider, became another important figure in Maggie's life. She taught Maggie songs and games, read to her for hours, and provided Emma with reassurance when she worried about developmental milestones or parenting decisions. Dorothy had raised 4 children of her own and had the calm wisdom of experience. "You're doing wonderfully," Dorothy told Emma regularly. "Maggie is thriving. She's curious, affectionate, confident. Those qualities come from good parenting." Emma was learning to accept compliments, to believe that maybe she was actually doing okay at this impossible task of raising a human being. By August, Emma felt established in ways she never had before. She had a home, a career, a community, a routine. She had achieved stability that had seemed impossible 2 years earlier. But with stability came space for other emotions she had been too busy surviving to feel. Grief appeared unexpectedly. Emma would be doing something ordinary, washing dishes or folding laundry, and suddenly be overwhelmed with sadness about her mother, about the childhood she never had, about the years she lost to homelessness. She would think about other young mothers who were still on the streets, still struggling, and feel guilty about her good fortune. Anger came too. Anger at her father, who had left before she was born. Anger at the foster care system that had failed her. Anger at society's indifference to homelessness. Anger at the boyfriend who had gotten her pregnant and disappeared. She hadn't allowed herself to feel these emotions when she was focused purely on survival, but now they demanded attention. By Maggie's first birthday in February, Emma's life looked nothing like it had 2 years earlier. She had a home, she had work she enjoyed, she had savings, she had friends, she had a community that supported her. Most importantly, she had her daughter, healthy and happy, taking her first wobbly steps across the cabin floor. On that birthday, Emma baked a cake using eggs from her chickens and vegetables from her garden. Carol came up to the cabin with presents and helped decorate. Sandra from the clinic stopped by. Mike brought a handmade wooden toy he had crafted in his workshop. Dorothy arrived with a beautiful quilt she had sewn for Maggie. Jennifer sent a generous gift card with a sweet note. It was a small party, but it was full of love. As everyone sang happy birthday and Maggie smashed her hands into the cake, Emma looked around at these people who had become her family. She thought about Margaret, about the gift she had given that was so much more than just property. Tears streamed down Emma's face, happy tears this time, tears of gratitude and disbelief at how far she had come. Carol noticed and squeezed her hand. "You okay?" "I'm more than okay," Emma whispered. "I never thought I'd have this, any of this. A year ago, I didn't know if I'd survive. Now look at us." That night, after everyone left and Maggie was asleep, Emma sat at the kitchen table with Margaret's letter in front of her. She pulled out a piece of paper and began to write. "Dear Margaret, I don't know if you can somehow receive this wherever you are, but I need to say thank you. Not just for the cabin and the money, but for believing I was worth saving, for seeing strength in me that I couldn't see in myself. You gave me more than a home. You gave me a chance at a real life. You gave Maggie a safe place to grow up. You gave us both a future. I promise to honor your gift. I promise to take care of this place, to use it to build a good life, to remember that wealth isn't just money, but purpose and resilience and community. I'm going to make sure Maggie knows about you. I'm going to tell her about the great-great-aunt who saved us both. I'm going to teach her what you taught me, that we're stronger than we know, that we can survive anything, that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is a chance to prove what they're capable of. Thank you for giving me that chance. With love and gratitude, Emma." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in the metal box with the remaining money, then returned the box to its hiding place in the cellar. It felt right to keep it there, a connection to Margaret and everything she had given them. Sandra, who had continued checking in on Emma regularly even after Maggie's birth, noticed signs that Emma was struggling emotionally despite her external success. During a routine checkup for Maggie in March, she pulled Emma aside. "How are you really doing?" Not the polite answer, the true answer. Emma hesitated. Then something in Sandra's kind, professional gaze made her honest. "I'm grateful for everything I have, but sometimes I feel overwhelmed by emotions I don't know how to process. Grief about my mother, anger about the past, fear about the future. I survived for so long by just pushing through, but now that I have space to actually feel things, it's hard." "That's completely normal," Sandra said. "Trauma doesn't just disappear because your circumstances improve. Have you considered talking to someone? A therapist?" Emma had never been to therapy. It seemed like something for other people, people who could afford it, people whose problems were worthy of professional attention. She said as much to Sandra. "Your problems are absolutely worthy of attention," Sandra said firmly. "And there are resources available. The Community Health Center offers counseling on a sliding scale. I can make a referral if you're interested." Emma thought about it for several days. Part of her resisted, seeing it as a weakness, an admission that she couldn't handle things on her own. But another part recognized that asking for help was actually a sign of strength, something Carol had taught her. She made an appointment with a therapist named Dr. Rachel Kim, a woman in her 40s with a calm presence and thoughtful manner. The first session was awkward. Emma didn't know how to talk about her feelings, didn't have vocabulary for the complex emotions swirling inside her. But Dr. Kim was patient, asking gentle questions, helping Emma begin to untangle years of accumulated pain. Over the following months, therapy became an important part of Emma's life. She went twice a month, using the time to process her childhood trauma, her experience of homelessness, her fears about motherhood, her struggles with self-worth. Dr. Kim helped her understand that her reactions were normal responses to abnormal circumstances, that she wasn't broken or weak, but resilient and strong. One breakthrough came when Dr. Kim asked Emma to write a letter to her younger self, the terrified teenager in foster care, the desperate young woman sleeping under bridges. Emma resisted at first, finding the exercise painful and pointless. But once she started writing, something unlocked. "Dear younger Emma, I know you're scared. I know you think you're alone and that nobody cares whether you live or die. I know the world feels impossibly hard and that you can't see any way forward. But I need you to know something. you survive. Not only that, you thrive. You become a mother, you own a home, you build a career, you create a life that would seem impossible from where you're standing now. The pain you're experiencing isn't permanent. The loneliness doesn't last forever. You will find people who care about you, who see your value, who become your family. All the skills you're learning right now, how to survive on nothing, how to be resourceful, how to keep going when everything feels hopeless, those skills will serve you later. You're not just enduring trauma, you're building strength that will carry you through anything. Hold on, keep fighting. Your life is worth living even when it doesn't feel that way. I promise you, better days are coming. Love, future Emma. Reading the letter back during her therapy session, Emma cried harder than she had in months. Dr. Kim handed her tissues and waited patiently. What are you feeling right now? Dr. Kim asked gently. Compassion, Emma said. For the first time, I feel compassion for that girl instead of shame. I spent so long angry at myself for ending up homeless, like it was my fault. Like I should have been stronger or smarter. But she was just a kid. She was doing her best with nothing. That's a significant shift, Dr. Kim observed. You're starting to separate your worth from your circumstances. They're not the same thing. The therapy work was hard but transformative. Emma started sleeping better. The panic attacks that had occasionally seized her, especially in crowded places or when faced with authority figures, became less frequent. She learned coping strategies for anxiety, ways to ground herself when painful memories surfaced. She also learned to set boundaries, something she had never done before. Emma had always felt obligated to say yes to any request, afraid that refusing would mean losing relationships or opportunities. Dr. Kim helped her understand that healthy relationships included mutual respect for limits. When one of her bookkeeping clients began calling at inappropriate hours and demanding immediate responses to non-urgent questions, Emma practiced setting clear boundaries about her availability. The client responded well, apologizing for overstepping. Emma realized that respecting herself actually improved her professional relationships, rather than damaging them. Spring came early that year. By March, the snow had melted and wildflowers were blooming across the property. Emma planted an expanded garden, adding fruit trees and berry bushes. She spent her mornings working on accounting for her clients, her afternoons playing with Maggie and working in the garden, and her evenings reading on the porch while her daughter explored the forest edge under careful supervision. Maggie was talking now, stringing together simple sentences that delighted Emma constantly. Mama, look, bird, pretty. Maggie wants snack. The cabin filled with the sound of toddler chatter, and Emma recorded as much as she could, wanting to preserve these precious moments. She was also teaching Maggie about the natural world around them. They identified plants and trees together using field guides from Margaret's collection. They watched birds and learned their names. They observed the chickens and talked about where eggs came from. Emma wanted her daughter to grow up understanding that food came from earth and labor, not just grocery stores. One warm afternoon in April, Emma was hanging laundry on the line she had strung between two trees when she heard Maggie laughing. She turned to see her daughter chasing a butterfly through the tall grass, stumbling on her unsteady legs, giggling with pure joy. Emma stopped what she was doing and just watched. This moment, this perfect, ordinary moment of her daughter playing safely in their own yard, at their own home. A year ago, this would have seemed impossible. 2 years ago, she had been sleeping under bridges, wondering if she would survive another day. She thought about all the moments that had led her here, the hard ones and the lucky ones, the kindness of strangers and her own stubborn refusal to give up, the inheritance that had saved her and the work that had transformed it into a real life. Maggie ran to her, arms up, wanting to be held. Emma scooped her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. Then she carried her daughter to the porch and sat in the old rocking chair Margaret must have sat in countless times. The mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped and eternal. The pine trees whispered in the wind, chickens clucked in their coop. The garden stretched green and promising in the afternoon sun. Everything here was real and solid and hers. In May, Emma made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. She reached out to a local organization that provided support to homeless youth and volunteered to share her story. The organization was hosting a fundraising event and asked if Emma would be willing to speak publicly about her experience. Emma's first instinct was to refuse. The thought of standing in front of a crowd talking about the lowest points of her life made her physically sick with anxiety. But she kept thinking about the young women still living on the streets, still struggling, still believing their situations were hopeless. If her story could give even one person hope or inspire someone to donate to services that saved lives, wasn't it worth the discomfort? She worked on her speech for weeks, writing and rewriting, practicing in front of the mirror, trying to find the balance between honest and too raw, between hopeful and unrealistic. Dr. Kim helped her process the anxiety and reminded her that vulnerability was courage, not weakness. The event was held at a hotel in Bend, attended by about 200 people. Emma stood backstage with Maggie on her hip, her hands shaking, her heart pounding. Carol was in the audience for support. Jennifer was there, Mike and Dorothy. Even Sandra had come. When Emma walked onto the stage, the lights were blinding. She couldn't see individual faces, which actually helped. She set Maggie down with a volunteer backstage, took a deep breath, and began. 2 years ago, I was 8 months pregnant and living in a homeless shelter in Portland. I had no family, no money, no hope for the future. I was convinced that the state would take my baby the moment she was born because I had nothing to offer her. I spent nights lying awake, trying to figure out how to survive another day. She told them about Margaret's inheritance, about the terror and gratitude of receiving that gift. She talked about the challenges of making the cabin livable, about learning skills from scratch, about the people who had helped her along the way. She talked about Maggie, about motherhood, about building a life from absolutely nothing. I'm not sharing this story to make you feel sorry for me, Emma said, her voice growing stronger. I'm sharing it because homelessness doesn't happen because people are lazy or broken or making bad choices. It happens because systems fail, because families fall apart, because one bad event cascades into another until you're drowning and can't find the surface. I was lucky. I received an inheritance that most people will never get, but I also worked harder than I've ever worked in my life. I learned skills, I asked for help, I accepted support when it was offered, and I survived. There are young women right now, tonight, sleeping under bridges and in doorways. They're someone's daughter, someone's friend. They're human beings with potential and dreams and the capacity to thrive if given a chance. The organization we're supporting tonight gives people that chance. They provide shelter, food, job training, medical care, and most importantly, dignity and hope. When I was homeless, a social worker gave me a list of resources and told me to get my life together. But you can't get your life together when you're exhausted and hungry and scared all the time. What changed everything for me wasn't just the cabin. It was the people who saw my humanity when I couldn't see it myself. It was Carol who hired me when no one else would. It was Mike who taught me skills without judgment. It was Sandra who provided medical care with kindness. It was this community which embraced me and my daughter and made us feel like we belonged. That's what these organizations do. They see people's humanity. They provide not just services, but dignity. Your donations tonight will literally save lives. I know because people like you saved mine. Emma finished speaking to a standing ovation. People were crying. The applause continued for what felt like forever. Emma returned backstage, picked up Maggie, and held her tight, shaking with adrenaline and relief and something that felt like pride. Later, as people mingled and donated, dozens of individuals approached Emma to thank her, to share their own stories, to tell her she was brave. Carol hugged her so hard Emma could barely breathe. That was incredible, Carol said. You are incredible. The event raised $40,000, significantly more than the organizers had hoped. Emma felt like she had finally given something back, had transformed her pain into something useful for others. The summer of Maggie's second year brought new milestones and challenges. Maggie's vocabulary exploded, and she never stopped talking. She asked endless questions about everything. Why is the sky blue? Where do chickens sleep? What's that smell? Emma found herself learning alongside her daughter, researching answers to questions she had never considered. Emma also expanded her garden significantly, adding more fruit trees and starting a small berry patch. She was thinking long-term now, planting things that would take years to mature but would eventually provide abundant food. She was investing in the future, building something that would outlast her. In July, Emma made another significant decision. She applied for certification as a licensed tax preparer and enrolled in additional accounting courses through the community college. She was working toward bigger goals now, thinking about eventually becoming a CPA. It would take years, but Emma had learned patience. She had learned that progress happened in small steps, accumulated over time. Jennifer supported her professional development enthusiastically, even offering to pay for some of her coursework. The construction company was growing, and Jennifer wanted Emma to grow with it. They talked about Emma eventually taking on more responsibility, maybe even becoming a partner in the business someday. The idea of being a business owner still felt surreal to Emma. She was just trying to get through each day, to be a good mother, to pay her bills. But Jennifer insisted that Emma was capable of so much more than she believed. You have something many people don't, Jennifer told her during a business lunch in August. You understand what it means to have nothing. That makes you incredibly motivated, incredibly careful with resources, incredibly grateful for opportunities. Those are traits that make excellent business owners. Emma was learning to accept that maybe she did have valuable qualities beyond just surviving. Maybe her past, rather than being something to overcome, was actually a source of strength and unique perspective. By autumn, Emma felt settled in ways she never had before. The cabin felt like home. The rhythms of the seasons felt familiar. She knew which trees changed color first in fall, which birds migrated when, how to read the sky for coming weather. She had become part of this place, rooted here as firmly as the pines that surrounded the cabin. Maggie would be 3 soon, which meant thinking about preschool. Emma researched options in Bend, visited several schools, and felt the familiar anxiety about money and logistics. But she also felt confident that she would figure it out, because she always did. One cool October evening, Emma sat on the porch with a cup of tea after putting Maggie to bed. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The air smelled of wood smoke and fallen leaves. The chickens had settled into their coop for the night. The solar panels gleamed on the roof, storing energy for tomorrow. Emma pulled out her journal and began to write. Dear Maggie, someday, when you're old enough to understand, I'm going to tell you this whole story. Where we came from, what we survived, how we built this life. I want you to know that you saved me as much as Margaret's gift did. You gave me a reason to keep fighting when I wanted to give up. You taught me what unconditional love feels like. You showed me that I'm capable of so much more than I believed. I want you to grow up knowing that you come from strength, that your great-great-aunt Margaret was a woman who survived loss and built a life of independence and purpose, that your mother was homeless and scared, but refused to let those circumstances define her, that you were born into struggle but surrounded by love. I want you to know that asking for help isn't weakness, that community matters, that kindness changes lives, that resilience isn't about never falling, but about getting back up every single time. I want you to have everything I didn't have: stability, education, opportunities, safety. But I also want you to appreciate what you have, to understand that not everyone gets these chances, to feel responsibility to help others when you can. You're going to make mistakes. Everyone does. You're going to face challenges and disappointments and heartbreak. But you're strong, Maggie. Strength is in your blood, in your story, in the very cabin walls around you. Never forget where you came from. Never forget the people who helped us. Never forget that your life was fought for, worked for, built from nothing with determination and hope and love. I love you more than words can express. You're my greatest accomplishment, my deepest joy, my reason for everything. Love always, Mama. Spring came early that year. By March, the snow had melted and wildflowers were blooming across the property. Emma planted an expanded garden, adding fruit trees and berry bushes. She repaired the old shed and organized all of Margaret's tools. She spent her mornings working on accounting for her clients, her afternoons playing with Maggie, and her evenings reading on the porch while her daughter explored the forest edge under careful supervision. One warm afternoon in April, Emma was hanging laundry on the line she had strung between 2 trees when she heard Maggie laughing. She turned to see her daughter chasing a butterfly through the tall grass, stumbling on her unsteady legs, giggling with pure joy. Emma stopped what she was doing and just watched. This moment, this perfect, ordinary moment of her daughter playing safely in their own yard, at their own home. A year ago, this would have seemed impossible. 2 years ago, she had been sleeping under bridges, wondering if she would survive another day. She thought about all the moments that had led her here, the hard ones and the lucky ones, the kindness of strangers and her own stubborn refusal to give up, the inheritance that had saved her and the work that had transformed it into a real life. Maggie ran to her, arms up, wanting to be held. Emma scooped her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. Then she carried her daughter to the porch and sat in the old rocking chair Margaret must have sat in countless times. The mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped and eternal. The pine trees whispered in the wind, chickens clucked in their coop. The garden stretched green and promising in the afternoon sun. Everything here was real and solid and hers. Emma kissed the top of Maggie's head and rocked slowly, feeling the weight of her daughter, the warmth of the sun, the peace of this place. She was home, finally, impossibly beautifully home. And somewhere, she hoped Margaret knew. She hoped Margaret could see what her gift had become. Not just a cabin, but a life. Not just survival, but a future. Not just shelter, but a family. Emma had been stronger than she knew. And now, she would teach her daughter the same lesson. That strength isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up. It's about accepting help when you need it and giving help when you can. It's about building something meaningful from nothing. It's about never giving up, even when everything seems lost. The sun moved lower in the sky, painting everything gold. Maggie fell asleep in Emma's arms, peaceful and safe. Emma continued rocking, watching the light change, listening to the forest, feeling profoundly grateful for this life she almost didn't get to live. Tomorrow she would work in the garden. She would make dinner from food she had grown herself. She would tuck her daughter into bed in their own home and read her stories by lamplight. She would fall asleep to the sound of wind in the pines and wake to birdsong and sunlight through the windows. These ordinary miracles. This extraordinary ordinary life. This home that Margaret had given her and that Emma had transformed into everything she needed. You were right, Emma whispered into the evening air, speaking to Margaret across time and distance. I was stronger than I knew. Thank you for believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. Thank you for this chance. I won't waste it. I promise? The mountains stood silent and strong, bearing witness to promises kept and futures built, and lives transformed by love and determination and the simple grace of being given a chance. And in that moment, Emma Rodriguez knew with absolute certainty that she and Maggie were going to be okay. More than okay. They were going to thrive. Because they were stronger than they knew, and they had finally found their way home.